Good evening. You're listening to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you as usual from 221B Baker Street. That's west of Orlando, Florida, in the Pinos Palace. Of course, that's the fictional, or is it fictional, residence of Sherlock Holmes, and because that's what the young 20-something Professor Brooks and I are going to be discussing with you, ladies and gentlemen, here tonight on Xtreme TV. We are choosing to do a version of Sherlock Holmes that Dr. Pixel, being the young person, I said, Doctor, I mean, I guess you're a doctor at a young age. You must be smart, but there's so many different interpretations over the years of Sherlock Holmes. It's in the public domain because it was written over 100 years ago. It's one of the reasons why it's prime material to be revamped in so many ways. You've probably seen different versions than I have. But this one in particular is the Granada television, I believe it is, from 1984, starting off, starring Jeremy Brett. And I believe it's Edward Hardick that plays Watson. And this is a personal favorite TV show of mine. I just absolutely love it. Much like The Prisoner, I think it's fantastic. Unlike The Prisoner, I've yet to find a bad episode, but I'm curious. Are you familiar with anything at all having to do with Sherlock Holmes, with having read it, watched it, or any version thereof?
Well, I've watched plenty of Sherlock Holmes. I've seen many adaptations. I haven't actually read it, and that is something that I should get to. But no, I've seen plenty. There was the one that they did on NBC Elementary, which is good.
That's
fun.
not Sherlock Holmes.
That's what it's trying to be.
It's not Sherlock Holmes, is it?
His name is Sherlock Holmes.
And what year is it set in?
It's a modern reimagining. It's an adaptation still. They're still adapting storylines based on the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Well, one of the things that we'll get into as we discuss season 1, episode 1 tonight, A Scandal in Bohemia, is exactly what you're referencing. To me, Sherlock Holmes is one of those things that outside of the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell and others have mentioned over the years in different cultures, as it's almost like a buddy cop thing. And I always go back to Sherlock Holmes as being maybe the start of it too. But once we start talking about this episode and we go through season 1 here, I think it'll be a little bit interesting to see, how this kind of develops. So you're not familiar with this television version at all, the British one, are you?
No, this is the first time that I've seen this one.
Take it away, sir.
All right. So first thoughts, the actors that we have here for Sherlock and Watson, they're great. I love Watson's voice. I tried looking to see where I recognize it from, but I can't find anything. He just has a familiar voice that goes ahead and you feel like you've heard it somewhere. This episode starts brilliantly with a narration from Dr. Watson, going ahead and talking about his good friend Sherlock and visiting him in his residence. And this evening, he's looking... I'm trying to think of the right word. He is deep in thought, and you can see the open drawer, and Watson looks down. He sees a syringe, and so he's like, what are we partaking in this evening? A little bit of cocaine, he says casually. But Sherlock is actually pondering a case that is on its way.
I talked about with you doing the Bond movies between season 1 episodes when we review them, and where we just did License to Kill, how we talked about the Bond template and formula for it and opening gambit. So sometimes you get a lot of that in here. First of all, the one thing I have to say about television, especially when I hate saying state-sponsored, but England and a lot of countries do that. This just is very lush production. This 84 thing is just incredible to me. One of the things about this whole particular season 1 is that it's supposed to be probably the most faithful adaptation to the books and all that, without changing stuff like modernizing Sherlock Holmes, which you've mentioned before. And I know there's been other things and other interpretations of it here. So this is filmed out in Liverpool area, Manchester area of England, kind of in the middle if you look there, northwest of London. And so to me, one of the things about the shows that really gets me in is I absolutely love the period piece of it to it. And it's not graphic, it's not disgusting. A kid could watch it, but an adult, and it seems like it's a very smart show. But I will say this, the opening bit of seeing some two-bit thug walking around tearing up the place looking for something, and this beautiful woman has a gun. It's kind of like, okay, we don't know who she is, but we will. And other things about it, it's like, okay, it's fairly routine, right? Like, it's nothing surprising about it. But I think the one thing that is very important, and just say here, even if people are familiar with Sherlock Holmes, if you're not, the relationship that Sherlock has with Watson is really what the story is. It's really not about the different types of, mysteries of the week. And you and I have covered plenty of them, from Columbo to others, right? But you're right. We see immediately, not Sherlock himself, but we see the settings around him and the place that he's in. Because the thing I really love about Watson is, I've always said that, very few shows capture where the lead guy and his sidekick, as people like to say it, where they're equal. And I definitely feel like Sherlock, who's basically on the autistic spectrum here, he's very smart, but he's not socially well adapted. He's not necessarily arrogant to the general public, but he's got a dependency, right? And you've got this other guy that's a doctor and very respectful and all that, and he's arguing with him within the first minute. Just watching these two argue is a very simple shot in the studio there, and I'm like, okay, if you're not engaged already with how they say it, that's pretty amazing. Because you're right, the voiceover means the smart one, the proper one, the adult one is in charge, basically having to take care of this child, which is like Sherlock Holmes in a way. And I will say this, Jeremy Brett does have a very theatrical bent to his performance. Some people love it, some don't. But we have a lot of people, including Sherlock Holmes here, or Jeremy Brett, and also the other actor. They were Shakespearean actors. I mean, so there's no doubt they're excellent. You're 100% right on here, and this will not stop here. But yeah, it looks like they get visited by this dude, and I can't tell if his mutton chops are real or probably fake. Although most of the outfits in here, I think, are I can't think of a better show that has turn of the century almost types of fittings and furnishings, and they probably filmed it in a location that's that old, right? So they're visited by somebody that's representing the Bohemian heir to the throne, until you see Sherlock basically stare at him saying, in his own way, no, you're not. And he basically has a proposition for him. And sir, I want to ask you, do you recall what that proposition is?
But he is...
It's conundrum, if you will, sir.
So, about a decade ago, he came to know a woman, and they had not a brief affair, but an affair at the time. And she happens to hold a compromising photo of the
And
pair.
what is that compromising photo, sir? Do you recall?
No, actually, I just recall them because when they go ahead and show like the set dressing of the photo being taken, he's in the chair and she joins in.
That's the compromising position, ladies and gentlemen. It's not sexual in nature at all. But the point is, yeah, there's an arranged relationship for him being a king and all that, and these things happen, especially back then at the time. And again, this is right before World War I. So to have something like this come out could ruin him. So he's basically like, hey, I need you guys to find this, right? The thing about this lady, Irene Adler, she's very beautiful. She's a good shot, an excellent shot. She seems very proper. There's nothing lewd and trampy going on here. They just give you a few little shots of what's going on. And the estate, this is where I get sucked into these shows. You and I have done some Hammer horror films and other types of things, some of the obscure ones too. And I'm starting to feel like I'm there. It's just the way it's shot. I really like it. It's very simple. It's very basic, but you get the natural lighting with all the outside shots and whatnot too. And this woman she's quite beautiful and intelligent. She is, by all intents, a catch. But I will add this to it. In this episode, whether I think you see it or not, I'm curious to how you think about this, because that's the crux of the story. No matter how it unfolds, you definitely get a sense at the time you have the Industrial Revolution going on, and in England basically being at the top of the food chain around the world globally at the time, you start getting a sense of classes, right? Sherlock Holmes is consulting. That means he can do this on his own. Otherwise, you got to deal with the regular scrubs. And so you've got poor class, you've got homeless, you've got a lot of machinery going on with people needing to run it. You've got kids working 18-hour days for pennies on a dollar, all that stuff, right? And then you've got rich people from noble lines that can do stuff. So you get a very clear sense of the ultra uber wealthy, the movers and shakers, people on the fringes of it, like Sherlock Holmes, and then a bunch of bums and scrubs, which will fill up a lot of these stories as we go on. Was that something that popped out to you, or what?
With this one, I'm gonna go ahead and say, and I have it running in the background right here, and I have the part where he just took off the mask.
Yep.
because he's a king. He comes under the guise of a count of Bohemia, but he is actually the king. And because he's in this position, he needs to call upon him privately. And you get to see when Sherlock goes ahead and he calls him out, like this little look of glee on his face, like, yes, I know I was right.
The micro expressions on his face while he's listening is the best acting to me. It's not as over the top sometimes things because, hey, do you think of Sherlock Holmes as a force of nature? Do you think of him as somebody that should be manic, up or down? I mean, honestly, that's one of the things we don't know. So everybody has their take on Sherlock, right?
Yep. And then when we go ahead and we get to see some of the flashbacks, the positions that they were in, she is a very stunning woman. She goes ahead and she does draw your eye easily. And so his story about how they came to be and spend time together, but I'm a king and I can't do that. Sherlock, of course, is going to take the case. And this next part is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. He goes in a disguise that's so good for the first 2 minutes. I didn't realize it was him.
Are you serious?
I am absolutely serious.
Okay.
Because those fake ass eyebrows, I could tell they were fake, but the way the makeup's applied, it goes ahead and he's going ahead, he's throwing his acting in, he's keeping his face back so his face looks just a touch fatter.
He's gone deep, he's undercover.
Yes, he goes so deep, and that is where some of the brilliance lies. And he goes ahead and even in his voice, okay, what are you doing? I loved it. Oh, it's great.
Well, this is the whole second act of it. We have the setup. We've got the journey part here. Yeah, he's going undercover trying to get close because he's following her, and the person she's getting ready to marry now, he's trying to just recon a little bit, and he kind of inadvertently worms his way into it because at one point when she goes to get married, as like a stable hand, if you will, she's like, oh, because he's in the church, they basically want him to get up there and be what you would call a witness to their official marriage, because Britain at this time had written a lot of laws. Some of America and other places have written their own rules and laws based off of certain standards and stuff, but England's definitely got lawyers. They've got people that know all this kind of stuff, so the whole marriage thing just isn't the ceremony. There's a legal thing to it. So it's like, hey, you go deep and you get involved in it. That's kind of interesting.
Yep. And the makeup is so good. It's so great. It's outrageous, but it's amazing. God.
And it's basic, right?
I was very impressed. And you go ahead and you get moments where, like, afterwards, where he's waiting outside at the wedding, and she is going ahead and she's like playing the piano. She's getting ready, and little things he goes ahead and starts noticing. We already introduced the concept of the woman who Irene Adler is to Sherlock. And
yeah, they tell us that at the very beginning of the voiceover. So we're supposed to, as a viewer, go, we need to pay attention to this woman. Now, when you're watching her, she's unremarkable in the sense that she doesn't stick out. She's not somebody you would know, that might not allow your ability to suspend disbelief into it, like with modern actors or just from their history of work. I mean, maybe if you're British, you may know who she was. But again, this show's, 40 years old, over 40 years old now. So again, very attractive woman, very proper by English standards, just the way she's presented. So, but she doesn't come across, I would say, and tell me how you think, she doesn't come across as like you going, wait a minute, is she like going to hold this guy up for some money? Is she trying to steal? Is she a gold digger? Any of these cynical things that come to mind, which are all relevant. We're trying to determine that. And you'd made the comment that you didn't recognize Sherlock for almost a minute or two when we starting to go undercover and worked his way in. You really, they're beautiful upfront shots. I mean, everything here is close in, right? But when he hears her like singing and playing the piano and all that, you can see something cross his face emotionally. And again, that's just really good acting, where he's kind of like impressed. And Sherlock, to this point, you go, he's taking this because he needs something to keep his brain active, because if not, he falls into some really bad, filthy habits, goes on drug binges and all that. It's not healthy. He knows it. So all of a sudden you go from that to taking this case to going, okay, let me check this chick out. holy shit, she's kind of cool, right? So you're starting to see these things unfold.
Yep. And then after that, we get into the final plot of the film. Sherlock's grand plan is another disguise. This one it's a little easier to go ahead and tell for the first second. You don't have distracting eyebrows from a Scotsman. You have he has a plan to basically go ahead and get himself beat up and brought into the house of Irene Adler. And once that happens, what is it that they go ahead and they roll like
kind of like that times version of like say like a flashbang or smoke grenade.
Yeah. So yeah, basically goes ahead, rolls in, sets off. Oh, it must have been brought in by must have been thrown in by one of the gang. The one thing that I'm pretty sure he was doing his best to avoid attention from her, because whenever she gets him inside and is like, "Let me look at your wound," he's like, "Oh, no, I couldn't let you." But it's mostly to not mess with his disguise.
Yep.
And ultimately, this does lead to her opening up her secret panel where she has to grab something out, where she would be keeping the compromising photo. And with that, he goes ahead. He's able to make his way out, and this is going to lead into a confrontation. They end up back at Baker Street, and somebody bids him, "Good night, Sherlock Holmes," as he's going ahead and going inside. The next day, they go to the estate to go ahead and see Irene and hopefully collect the photo. And she's not there.
What do all good women have in common? They run away.
Yes, she has run. She's gone. She's left England. She does not have have the photograph, the compromising photo there, just a photo of herself. And the king is like frustrated a little bit, but he's also like really impressed, as well as Sherlock. What a woman.
Yeah, it's what I would call a safe introduction to Sherlock Holmes. You find out really quick where Irene Adler's place is in the Sherlock Holmes franchise, and it's somebody that he has respect for. Certainly not a romantic interest, at least not by what we see at this particular point. And we only know what's presented to us, right? And you could argue that, well, hey, I'm watching a TV show that might take some liberties with what's in print and, stretch things out. We know this, right? So to me, I would just simply say that, like I say, it's a fairly safe episode. I wasn't really moved or awed in any particular way, although immediately, like the things that you mentioned, just you get two guys that look fairly ordinary, physically speaking, even though they're dressed well, and the way they speak. You mentioned the just the warming familiarity, almost father-like voice of Watson talking with the voiceover earlier. Like I mentioned, kind of like, the reasonable one out of the two. And then, of course, you got the petulant child here that's got a gift that needs to be harnessed, the energy level, the mental acuity of him. And so it's interesting because this is when you had enough time in your society for people to have a middle class or an upper middle class or institutions, even if they were government run, to kind of take a look at, hey, what did it mean to be a doctor? What did it mean to be a psychologist? What did it mean to actually motivate people and all these psychological things that basically in survival mode, you don't really have a chance to do. And frankly, you don't live very long. So it's one of the themes of the industrial age kind of here that I think is interesting, that just at the time of writing the stuff in the 1880s, 90s, whatever, for Sherlock Holmes, for Conan Doyle, for Sherlock's own character, that you start to see bits of it. So obviously he mentions at the beginning, he's like, well, it's on board out of my friggin' mind. If I don't have something to stimulate me or whatever like that, then whatever. And what I also, like I said, mentioned at the beginning is I really liked how Watson's not just a mouthpiece for Sherlock. Does he add a lot to this episode? No, but he doesn't seem like he's on a low level. Yes, the show is Sherlock, but it's supposed to be, right? It's not Sherlock Holmes and Watson. It's Sherlock Holmes. It's the adventures of Sherlock Holmes.
Not like some of the old radio shows of Sherlock Holmes where they just dumb down Dr. Watson and be like, "Oh, Sherlock, what's happening here?" No, he definitely seems to have a good head on his shoulders, and I do like what that end that he goes ahead and the King of Bohemia is like, "Oh, I must go ahead and reward you for your service. Well, perhaps this ring," and it's this thick, gaudy thing. But he says, "No, I would like that," and he motions to the photo, and he's going to go ahead and keep it and wonder about the woman that bested him.
Well, I don't know if she bested him, but
Well,
she
that's
did the
what
woman
it.
thing. Well, I'm just saying, you let somebody off the hook like that to go back in the morning with the dude to find it. I mean, that's kind of on you, Sherlock. I mean, I'm not saying he's simping out. I'm not saying he's a little pervy wanting to keep the photo. But look, I'm making a little bit of fun here, Adam. But like I say, very safe episode. I've said this before about older shows in general. They have a certain rhythm to them and pacing that doesn't speed up or slow down. It is a very verbal episode. I think we're going to have a tendency to see that a bit in here, but just in terms of the performances and how simple it is to watch, I think it's a really good introduction to Sherlock Holmes and bringing something from print to life that I go, yeah, it'd be nice to see a little bit more often where you're just kind of good about it. Get some great actors in here. A lot of side pieces and the sets are fantastic. They're filmed there. It's got that magic of the light and everything in the gardens and the estates and all the lights and everything there too. I mean, what more could you really ask for there too? So, it's not definitely action oriented. It's more of a spy show, and that's kind of what it should be to me. Final thoughts?
Yeah, very good, very good. First episode. I do wonder if maybe it's something that would benefit from being a little later in the series, actually, because going ahead and approaching Irene Adler and having his first case be the woman that got away. I think maybe that would have hit a little more later in the season, but it's a very good episode, very entertaining, and I look forward to the next one.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you can find this currently as of this recording. It's free on Tubi. I think it's free somewhere else. It might be on the Internet Archive for free. It's very nice looking color. It's not a crappy print or anything like that. So check that out. I believe it's Granada from 1984, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Until next week when we do episode 2, season 1, good night now.
This was not a Dan Curtis production.